What's up, everybody? I'm on vacation right now, so a little bit of a different location, but still wanted to get this video out. So this is gonna be 5 pieces of backpacking gear that I regret buying. I don't know what to say.
You're supposed to know what to say.
My sister Liza is holding the camera right now, so give a huge shout out to her.
I don't want to be in it.
So when I first started getting into backpacking, like everybody else, I obviously had no clue what I was doing, and so I would make guesses at what the right gear was, you know, try to do some research, watch dumb videos like this, but the truth is you're never gonna nail it, or maybe someone has, but most people aren't gonna nail it when they first start, and I was certainly no exception to that rule. So I'm gonna go through 5 items that I regret buying when I first started backpacking, and hopefully you won't make these same mistakes that I did. So backpacking gear item number 1 that I regret buying is a sleeping bag. And you might be thinking, Kyle, like obviously you need a sleeping bag. How the f do you regret buying a sleeping bag? And hear me out. What I mean by that is I don't regret buying like something to sleep in, but I really wish I would have bought a backpacking quilt instead of an actual sleeping bag. So I'm sure that most of you probably know what a backpacking quilt is, but in case you don't, it's basically like if you took a sleeping bag and just cut off the bottom half, you'll just be left with a quilt. I feel like it's pretty obvious what a quilt is, but I think the more important question is what's the benefit of a quilt over a sleeping bag, and why do you regret buying a sleeping bag instead of a quilt when you first started? So as many of you know, I really care about the weight of my backpack. I'm one of those stupid ultralight jackass people. The main benefit of using a quilt over a sleeping bag is that it's just a lot less weight, because again, you chop off the bottom half of that freaking quilt, or you chop off the bottom half of that sleeping bag, and then it's half the weight, or close to half the weight, or whatever. And you might think, well, then it's gonna be colder, right? And I'm gonna say wrong, because when you're laying on a sleeping bag, and especially a down sleeping bag, maybe not quite as much with synthetic materials, but with a down sleeping bag, when you lay on it, that shit just compresses. And when it compresses, it loses insulation. It's not gonna keep you as warm. So it's really not that useful, honestly. You're much better off just not carrying the bottom half in the first place, buying a really warm quilt, and you know you can still get them wide enough so that you can kind of tuck in the edges and do things like that. I feel like Liza doesn't know anything I'm talking about and probably thinks this is so dumb, but you really don't need a full big sleeping bag. You're really better off with a backpacking quilt, and this is something that I wish I had realized when I first started, because I could have saved myself some weight, but then again, I understand, like, it's intuitive. Like, you think you just need a sleeping bag when you first start out, and you know, maybe in winter backpacking or some, you know, extraordinary circumstances, if winter's extraordinary, but for other circumstances besides just like, you know, 3-season backpacking, then I'm sure there are some uses for actual sleeping bags. But for most backpacking trips, at least the ones that I do, a quilt is more than adequate. It's definitely the way to go, and that's something that I regret not knowing when I first started. So backpacking gear item number 2 that I regret buying when I first was getting into this, so that I was stupid for buying or whatever, is a water bladder for my backpack. And to be clear, I'm talking about the kind that you put in your backpack and then you have like a hose that comes down your shoulder or whatever, and then you like drink while you're hiking. And that is convenient, I'll be honest. Like, I get that, and maybe for day hikes this still probably makes sense, but for backpacking, I'm really just not a huge fan of keeping water inside of my backpack. And I learned this lesson the hard way on one of my very first trips ever. I had one of those like platypus things. It was inside the sleeve, inside my backpack. And the thing with these sleeves is, I know they're probably built pretty well, but if you use them enough, eventually some water is gonna leak out, whether it's an actual puncture in the bladder itself, or maybe like what happened in my circumstance, the valve that you use to fill the thing up obviously might come unscrewed. And so yeah, that happened to me. It wasn't the end of the world, thankfully, because the weather was warm, and the fact that my sleeping bag got completely soaked wasn't a huge deal. But if I was in like a shoulder season when I really needed to kind of rely on that quilt, I almost said sleeping bag. Actually, I had a sleeping bag back then. When I really needed to rely on that sleeping bag, then it might have been a little bit worse of a circumstance. And so I really do regret using a water bladder at first. Instead, what I wish I had done is just used a plastic water bottle like I do now. They're just safer in my opinion. Not to mention, it's also a pain in the ass to refill a water bladder too, Because unlike a water bottle, which you have in a pocket, you know, on the side of your hip or whatever, you can't just like take it out or, you know, take your pack off, take it out and fill it up. You have to go digging through your pack to do that. And if you're using a ultralight pack, like a frameless pack for instance, which I wasn't at the time, but if you are, then that might throw off the way things are packed and throw off the way that it fits, and then you gotta shove it back in there. It's just a pain in the ass is basically what I'm trying to say here. And so I would recommend, if you're first getting into this stuff, don't go the water bladder routes. Again, for day hikes, it's probably fine, but if you're backpacking, probably don't go the water bladder route. I would just use a plastic smart water bottle. All right, so backpacking gear item number 3 that I regret using when I first got into backpacking. And if you watch any other similar videos to this on other channels, you've probably heard this one before, so not to beat a dead horse too much, but solar panels and solar chargers. At least when I was using them, probably back in like 2012, 2013, maybe they've gotten better now, they probably have, but at least back then, those things are just shit, honestly. The reason these things suck is because you're just not gonna get that much juice out of them, honestly. And I will say I've done most of my backpacking on the East Coast, so maybe it's different out west where you get a lot more sun, but I can confidently say for the East Coast, like, you're not gonna get that much power out of these things. It's just not sunny enough, and when it is sunny, you're still gonna be in the trees, right? You're gonna be going through the green tunnel, as they call it, a lot of the time, and so you're not, there's just no sunlight. Like, even if it's sunny out, like, there's just not gonna be that much sunlight. And sure, maybe you wanna charge the thing when you get to like an overlook, or you're on top of a mountain and there's some, you know, some sun up there, but you might not feel like standing around for hours and hours and hours. And another reason why these things just aren't worth it, in my opinion, is because there's better alternatives. If there was literally no other way to charge your electronics on the trail, then fine, maybe they're worth it in that case, but power banks, people. There's plenty of really powerful power banks. There's plenty of really powerful power banks out there that are gonna charge your phone much more efficiently, at least in terms of your time, than a solar charger is. So, like I said, maybe they've gotten better since I used them. I still hear people complain about them a lot these days, so I feel like that's not the case, but I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, let me know, recommend a brand or whatever. And I guess if you have any input about how much more useful they might be out west where there's more sun, then please leave a comment with that as well. Backpacking gear item number 4 that I regret using when I first started, that I was stupid for using when I first started, is a SteriPen. If you're not familiar with what a SteriPen is, it's basically one of those like UV ray light things that you basically just twist around in your water for like a minute or two, and the light kills any viruses and bacteria that's in the water. Now, in theory, that sounds pretty cool, right? But I really wasn't a fan of using this thing for a number of reasons. First of all, and this one probably has improved since I used it, but the battery life was just terrible, and I really did not like relying on a set of batteries for something as essential as, you know, filtering your water, which is something you don't have to do with a filter or with Aquamir. Another thing that I didn't like about using the SteriPen was that in order to treat the water, you're really supposed to kind of like swirl it around a little bit, and I don't know, maybe you could get it to work in like a smart water bottle, but they definitely work better with like a Nalgene. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I don't like using Nalgenes. The last thing that I really didn't like about the SteriPen is that it kills the viruses and the bacteria, which is great, obviously, but there might be some floaties and random stuff that is in your water, basically, that you're not gonna be able to get rid of. Even though it's safe to drink, there's still gonna be some stuff in there just because, you know, you're not actually filtering it out, right? So I wasn't a huge fan of that either. For all those reasons, I do regret using the SteriPen. I guess with that said, though, I think if you were like doing some charity work in a country that has like really poor water quality, a SteriPen would probably be a good option. I'm not just gonna trash the product completely. There definitely are some uses for it. I just don't think that backpacking, especially ultralight backpacking, is one of those. Backpacking gear item number 5 that I regret buying when I was a stupid beginner or whatever is actually gonna be a little bit different, because this is gonna be an item that I did not buy that I wish I had bought. An item that I did not buy that I wish I had bought, and that is going to be trekking poles. So on one hand, I do understand a little bit why beginner backpackers might not spend a lot of money on a pair of trekking poles. They're not like essential right from the beginning. So like I get that, but I do think that trekking poles are super beneficial if you're going to be carrying any weight on your back at all, and even on day hikes, honestly, I still use them. And so I really wish I had gone that route right from the beginning. This was especially important, at least for me when I first started, because my pack weight was way heavier back then than it is now, and the heavier your pack, I feel like the more useful the trekking poles are in terms of, number one, just decreasing the load on your joints, your knees especially, your ankles as well, and also just keeping you on balance, because if you're trying to cross a stream or even just go down some really steep shit, it can be kind of hard without trekking poles sometimes. Let me know what you guys think of this in the comments. Tell me I suck and all of these items are amazing and I don't know what the I'm talking about. Or if you agree, tell me why you agree. And of course, if there's more items that you regret buying when you first started, let me know what they are. Leave a comment, increase my engagement, make me a rich, famous YouTuber. Be sure to check out my podcast, Trail Tales, if you want to hear more about some crazy thru hikers and backpackers and gear. And also check out that ceiling up there, and my sunglasses fell.